Good evening. Welcome to the library, readers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. My name is Andrew Medler, and I am president and director of Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and it is my honor to wish all of you a very, very happy National Library Week. Yes! And today, in fact, as I'm sure you all know, is National Library Workers' Day. How about a round of applause? Yes, for all of the brave and wonderful library workers everywhere. So because of this, it is particularly poignant, I believe, to gather together here to celebrate a trailblazing library worker, Dame Vivian Ann Davidson Hewitt. This, the third annual of these convenings, is a signature component of our Hewitt initiative here at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, in which we aim to celebrate the legacy of CLP's first librarian of color and to inspire current and future generations to follow in her trailblazing footsteps, contributing their talent, their skills, their passion in the service of all of our neighbors. I'm very grateful to Dr. Deborah Rogers, the library's Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility, and her team. Yes, thank you. Thank you all for making this time a reality. Thanks also to my colleagues, both in this hall and in libraries across our city, working at this very, very moment, serving their community. My thanks to our dedicated Board of Trustees, including our chair, Mark Brown, who is here this evening along with several of his colleagues. And I want to thank our partners at the Regional Asset District and our fellow librarians at the Allegheny County Library Association and the University of Pittsburgh's School of Computing and Information. And thanks to my fellow Rutgers alum, Dr. Cooke. Thank you for saying yes to being with us and for sharing with all of us. Thank you. And now it is a particular delight of mine to welcome the fabulous Vivian Hewitt LeSean to the podium to offer her reflections on her grandmother, the woman we honor this evening, Dame Vivian Ann Davidson Hewitt.
Good evening. I'd like to say, of course, thank you to all involved with bringing this wonderful evening together. My name is Vivian Hewitt LeSean, and I'm going to speak briefly about the namesake of this lecture series, my grandmother, Vivian Ann Davidson Hewitt. She loved telling folks to Google her. She even wrote a letter to Queen Elizabeth II to share some of her life story when she became a centenarian. She had every right to, considering she was appointed the title of Dame that was approved by the Queen. If you do Google her, the big headline is usually about Vivian being the first African-American librarian in the city of Pittsburgh, calling both the Wiley Avenue branch and Homewood branch the place where her career started. Pennsylvania was her home, where in her family, education was first and foremost. She told us that as a child, she was gifted a roll-top desk and she would play librarian. She was a Depression-era kid that made her way through Geneva College in Newcastle and then on to Carnegie Tech, for which she was recognized as alumni of both CMU and Pitt. She formed lifelong friendships through the Aurora Reading Club, which is one of the oldest African-American arts and cultural clubs, and has been meeting regularly for over 130 years, and I am honored to be a current member of that club. While her experience in Pittsburgh was overall positive, she did encounter racism. One story that she shared with our family was when she went to pay at a local restaurant and was told never to come back by request of other diners. She did not back down during the confrontation, and a fellow diner stood up in her defense, and he turned out to be a professor at Pitt. So even when faced with racial challenges, she continued to get the job done. Years later, after marrying the love of her life, John H. Hewitt II, after only knowing him for 90 days, her career continued to flourish. They moved to his hometown of New York, where his family and social circle afforded her additional opportunities that she lovingly credited him for. For example, her sister-in-law, my Aunt Deli, worked for Langston Hughes as an associate and secretary, and she also was the owner-curator of an art gallery called the Marketplace Gallery, which was the only black gallery in Harlem at the time. The Hewitts also frequently purchased original artwork through that gallery, and Langston Hughes often held poetry readings. Vivian met wonderful people from the Harlem Renaissance thanks to this connection. Fast forward to 1952 when they were blessed with their son, John H. Hewitt III. Some short years later, her career showed no signs of slowing down. She had been working at a publishing house, and then she was offered a position as the librarian for the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm going to read some of her own words from an interview that she gave. And a quick side note, she mentions Dean Rusk in this story, and he went on to become the U.S. Secretary of State under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. One of the highlights at Rockefeller Foundation was when Dean Rusk and Mr. Kimball were with their wives doing an on-site visit at our agricultural library in Mexico City. And the librarian would say, "Oh, I'm going to be away on foundation business for all summer, and my work is going to pile up." Mr. Rusk turned to her and asked, "How would you like some help from New York City?" She said, "Oh, I wouldn't dare ask Mrs. Hewitt. She's married and has a child." He said, "That's not for us to decide. We'll ask Mrs. Hewitt." And they did. Vivian was brought on as the bibliographer and the librarian at the Mexico City office. The story goes on about how she experienced Mexico City, kind of bumbling her way through, meeting future Nobel Prize winners, exploring the city with friends introduced to her through Langston Hughes, and she joined right in with the locals. Communication consisted of a lot of letter writing, and Vivian had the most beautiful penmanship. And being a librarian, a professional archivist, she sent lots of photos home. Over the years, she went back to Mexico City 8 times, where she met and developed a friendship with activist, artist, and sculptor Elizabeth Catlett during that time. She was clearly bit by the travel bug with this experience, being a catalyst. A woman traveling alone during those times was not often the norm, but she fully embraced the opportunity along with its accompanying challenges. Vivian's career shifted from the Rockefeller Foundation to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she was chief librarian for 20 years. She traveled all over the world representing the SLA, which she was the first African-American woman to be the president. In one interview, she says that Rockefeller prepared me for an international life. She and her family traveled in a private capacity as well, fueled by their love of Haitian and African-American art. This in turn contributed to their art collecting journey over their 50-year marriage, a portion of which became the Hewitt Collection. It is considered to be one of the largest and most comprehensive collections of African-American art in the country. The 58 pieces acquired by Bank of America include artists such as Elizabeth Catlett, Romare Bearden, Jonathan Green, Anne Tanksley, Henry Osawa Tanner, and Hale Woodruff, are permanently housed at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture in Charlotte, North Carolina. The Gantt Center describes the collection as an assemblage of works that celebrates the expression and passion of 20 artists and 2 avid collectors. After retirement, which just so happens to coincide with when my sister was born, forever being a librarian, a teacher, a mentor, she remained active in several clubs and organizations, such as the Pierians, AKA, and Jack and Jill Club, but mostly she made time to fully embrace the role of being grandmommy. She did go on a 10-year national tour with the Hewitt Collection when it traveled to 25 different museums before it landed in its new home in Charlotte. She lived a life full of the things that she cherished the most: family, art, the pursuit of knowledge, and experiencing the world through travel. And for those of us afraid to fly, I get to travel through the world of real printed books. She used to say, "You can curl up with a good book, but you can't curl up with a computer." So don't forget to Google her. I do all the time. And now I invite Dr. Mary Kay Biagini to the podium to introduce our Hewitt Lecturer this year, Dr. Nicole C. Cooke.
Thank you. I bring you greetings from the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh, and we're delighted to be a collaborator in this exciting 3rd year of the Vivian Hewitt Lecture. And it's my honor and real pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicole Cooke, who is the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair and Professor in the School of Information and Communications at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Cooke is an educator, and she's a national expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she educates students to be culturally competent so that they can serve the diverse communities effectively and advocate for those communities. Before she became an educator, she worked 13 years in medical, academic, and public libraries. And she became then an educator through multiple degrees from Rutgers, already praised, and she has a degree from Penn State University. She's also an author and an editor. Just a few of her works are a new book that has come out this year, Foundations of Social Justice. In 2018, she wrote the book, Fake News and Alternate Facts, Information Literacy in a Post-Truth Era. And second edition should be coming, huh? And her book that she published last year, The Legacy of Black Women in Librarianship, When They Dared to Be Powerful. She's also the editor of the Critical Cultural Information Studies series, and that will publish her first book in that series this year, the second edition of Developing Culturally Competent Librarians. But I think what's really interesting is her career. And I look at 2007, when you were one of Library Journal's movers and shakers, and by the next year, you were one of the 12 original American Library Association Spectrum doctoral students. And from that point, your career just boomed. She's been a fellow and a visiting scholar at the Schoenberg Center at the New York Public Library, part of the consortium of Black Metropolis Research and at the University of Chicago, and a visiting scholar at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. She's won the Lippincott Award, the Advocacy Award from the Black Caucus of ALA. She won a Carnegie Whitney Grant recipient. She won that grant. Of course, the Distinguished Alumni at Rutgers, the Martin Luther King Social Justice Award at the University of South Carolina. In 2020, with your colleague, David Lanks, you did the Skill Set podcast, which you're right there, that was co-sponsored with Publishers Weekly. She's won an Excellence in Teaching grant from both South Carolina and from the American Association of Library and Information Science Education. You've done it all. Every year there is something truly exciting and a part that helps us all in this profession. And so as I'm reading through all of these things, I'm thinking, when do you ever have a moment to do something? But I did find, by listening to the podcast, weekends are her time for herself. So this could be another way to learn from her. What brings her joy? Her 3 dogs, her crafting, and taking time to care for myself. Again, a lesson that we all should be taking. So what a career, what a leader, and what an inspiration you are to all of this. So thank you, Dr. Cooke, for all of your contributions. I think all of us can benefit by seeing you as an exemplar. So following Dr. Cooke's talk, we'll have a dialogue and questioning, and we'll have 2 CLP employees, one of whom I'm proud to say is a current Pitt student, Valerie Perez, and Dawn Martin, who is the CLP teen intern and won the Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh display. So they will talk with Dr. Cooke and ask questions. So I invite you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Cooke, our third Vivian Hewitt Lecture. Dr. Cooke.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, thank you for coming tonight. It is my extreme honor and pleasure to be here this evening, and not even this boot was gonna keep me from coming. Thank you to Andrew and Deborah and the whole team. It has been a lovely visit, and it is, again, my honor to even briefly step in the shoes of Dame Vivian Hewitt. Oh, there we go. So Deborah has me on a clock, so I'm gonna do my best. I am academic. So what I'm gonna do is give you the first part and the last part. As I said to Deborah, I said, I want you all to see my slides, so I'm just gonna step you through the slides in the middle. Dame Vivian has so many amazing pictures and her archives. I really want to share that with you. So as you heard, I am the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair at the University of South Carolina, and I refer to that as the dream job I didn't know I wanted. And Mrs. Baker was a legendary Black librarian who spent 37 years at the New York Public Library. She was at the famed 135th Street branch where Dame Vivian spent a little bit of time. In her archives, Dame Vivian's archives are at the Schomburg. So when I got the call about the lecture, I was like, oh, I mean, what kind of kismet is this that I now get to give give a lecture in her honor? So as you heard very briefly, I do a lot of work in Black librarianship, and I consider that to be my heart's work. Really talking about these stories and learning about the Black woman who really helped to shape this profession. So I'm very privileged to be able to teach a course in the history of Black librarianship at the University of South Carolina. You heard about the book, and you heard about the research fellowships. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the things that were in Dame Vivian's archives at the Schomburg. And on the left-hand side, you see that she's with the legendary E.J. Josie, who is another Black librarian that if you don't know, I hope you will Google him too. And this is just some of her writing and some of the pictures that she has at the Schomburg. So I thought it was very fitting that I bring some of this information to you. All right, so now I'm going to get into kind of the more intense part. All right, so I want to begin by rejecting an idea that sounds harmless but can do real damage. The idea that librarianship is a quiet profession. It is quiet only when you ignore who gets silenced. If you never ask who is missing from the catalog, who is absent from the syllabus, whose story is boxed up in storage, whose image never makes it to the wall, whose knowledge never gets treated as foundational, then yes, librarianship can look quiet. But the moment you ask harder questions, the work changes. It becomes public, it becomes contested, it becomes moral. This is why Vivian Davidson Hewitt matters. And I want to be precise about that. She matters as an individual, but she also matters as part of a longer Black librarianship tradition. Black librarians have been building reading rooms, preserving history, mentoring readers, and defending intellectual life long before many mainstream institutions were willing to recognize that work. Dame Hewitt did not appear out of nowhere. She inherited a tradition of cultural stewardship, and she extended it into spaces that often acted as though Black leadership in libraries was new, unusual, or supplemental. Not because she gives us a comfortable success story, not because she lets us celebrate a first and move on, not because her name sounds good on a program or a lecture. She matters because her life forces us to confront librarianship as a field where choices create visibility, authority, memory, and belonging. And she did not make those choices from the margins of the profession. She made them from inside. As you heard, she began her library career in 1944 as the first Black librarian at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. She later worked in academic, publishing, foundation, and international policy settings, and she became the first Black president of the Special Libraries Association. At the same time, with her husband John, she built one of the most respected collections of Haitian and African American art in the country. So when we talk about Hewitt, we are not talking about a side interest in art that sat outside of her personal life. We're talking about a woman who understood in her bones that information systems and cultural systems are connected. She knew that what gets collected gets remembered. She knew that what gets named gets found. She knew that what gets displayed gets valued. She knew that what gets ignored can vanish in plain sight. So I'm going to, should have showed you this. I have to say, this is one of my favorite pictures of her because she actually looks like my grandmother. I'm skipping all kinds of slides. I apologize. Okay. So I want to, after I show you her many firsts, I want to talk a little bit more about Dame Hewitt through the lens of roots, wings, compass, and horizon. All right, so it's a metaphor. I'm gonna go all academic on you just for a second, and I'm gonna skip part of this, but I want you to know the framework through which I wanted to study Mrs. Hewitt. So we have roots, wings, compass, and horizon. So I want you to hear those words not as decoration, not as a motivational slogan, not as something soft. I want you to hear them as leadership work. Because for librarians, educators, archivists, museum workers, and people who lead even without titles, leadership is rarely one big dramatic move. It is a pattern of choices, repeated choices, visible choices, sometimes costly choices. Vivian Davidson Hewitt gives us a way to think about those choices with greater honesty. She gives us roots. She gives us wings. She gives us a compass. And she gives us a horizon. And if we are serious about culturally responsive leadership, then we need each and every one of these. So I'm going to talk about roots, and then I'm going to skip to the end. But if you have questions about wings and the cost and the horizon, I am certainly happy to have further discussion. So if we start with roots, our roots are cultural competence, humility, empathy, and reflection. That is the underground work. That is the work before the work. This is the part that nobody applauds, but that everything depends on. Hewitt's roots began with clarity. She understood that Black art and Black history were not absent because they did not exist. They were absent because institutions had failed to value them, failed to collect them, failed to support them, or failed to treat them as central. That is a different way of seeing the world. It shifts the question. The question is no longer, where is the material? The question then becomes, why was it not welcomed in the first place? That question matters in every library, every archive, every classroom, every meeting, and every collection budget. Cultural competence means that you know the histories behind the people, the records, the art, and the silences. For Hewitt, that meant more than recognizing titles or famous names. It meant understanding Black cultural production as something broad, layered, living, and often under-recognized by the institutions that claim to preserve culture. Cultural humility means that you do not mistake access for authority or inclusivity. As we know, Hewitt was highly accomplished. Excuse me. She knew how institutions worked. She moved through the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, Atlanta University, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She knew the language of professional legitimacy. But she did not confuse that fluency with ownership over the communities and artists whose work mattered to her. It is very easy in our fields to think that professional training gives us the final word. It does not. Professional training can give you method, it can give you standards, it can give you access, it can even give you power. But if it does not also give you humility, it can make you dangerous. Empathy means that you understand that collecting, preserving, and interpreting are not abstract acts. They touch real lives. They carry memory. They shape identity. They tell people whether the institution sees them as human, historic, and worthy of care. Hewitt once described collecting art as a deeply emotional experience. She said it evoked memories, places, movement, and the worlds that she and John had visited together. That matters because it tells us something crucial. She did not collect art like a trophy hunter. She collected with feeling, with relationship, and with a sense that art could hold lived experiences. Reflection means that you ask what your own habits allow you to miss. What do you call neutral that is actually inherited bias? What do you call professional judgment that is really just institutional habit? What do you call standard practice that is simply familiarity with someone else's center? Hewitt's roots were strong because she understood both access and exclusion. She knew how to enter institutions. She also knew what institutions routinely failed to see. And that is why roots matter, because without them, leadership becomes performance. You can say the right words, you can read the right statements, you can attend the right workshops, and then you keep building the same collection, the same curriculum, the same committee culture, the same quiet. If our roots are weak, our values stay decorative. If our roots are strong, we stop calling absence accidental. We name it for what it is: produced, maintained, defended. And once we see that clearly, we cannot go back to pretending that our work is neutral. So I'm just going to stay with roots a little bit, a few more minutes, and talk about what it looks like in practice. Because roots are not just beliefs, they are habits of preparation. They are forms of discipline. They are ways of moving through institutions without surrendering our judgment to them. Hewitt's early life gives us part of that lesson. At Geneva College, she studied psychology and French. She served as a co-editor of the student publication. She joined student clubs. She learned how language works, how people are shaped, and how institutions teach belonging long before they use that word. Then she earned her library science degree, and in that same year, she became the first Black librarian at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. So let's not rush past that. The first in 1944. So the word first can sound celebratory from a distance, but from up close, it often means exposure. It often means scrutiny. It means entering a workplace that has no habit or experience of imagining you there. To be the first and to stay requires more than talent. It requires steadiness. It requires reading a room quickly. It requires understanding how institutions reward compliance, how they test confidence, and how they often confuse whiteness with professionalism. Roots in practice meant that Hewitt learned the institution, but she did not mistake the institution for truth. That distinction matters to all of us. We need to know how systems work. We need to understand budgets, hiring structures, metadata, collection workflows, curriculum approval, governance, donor language, and professional associations. But if you do not also cultivate the inner freedom to question those systems, then your competence simply makes you more efficient at reproducing harm. Hewitt's later career in special librarianship deepens that lesson. She worked in spaces where information had high stakes: publishing, foundations, international policy, special librarianship, they all demand rigor, precision, and credibility. It teaches that organization shapes access and that access shapes power. And that kind of work sharpens you. It teaches you that discovery is never only about content, it is also about structure. It teaches you that naming, indexing, filing, and presenting information all influence what decision makers see. And that is why roots in practice are so important in this moment. Because many people in our institutions still want to separate the technical from the political. They want to talk about systems without talking about power. They want to talk about metadata without talking about language. They want to talk about collections without talking about exclusion. They want to talk about excellence without, pardon me. They want to talk about excellence without asking who has historically been permitted to define it. Hewitt's life tells us that this separation is false and that neutrality does not exist. A librarian who understands power reads differently. A collector who understands power buys differently. A teacher who understands power assigns differently. A leader who understands power listens differently. So when I talk about roots, I do not mean private feelings. I mean that we need to learn the history. We need to study the field. We need to read the room. We need to know the system and to interrogate that system. We need to stay teachable. We need to stay accountable, and we need to stay awake. And this is what roots look like in practice. So if you want a concise line to carry with you, here it is. Strong roots do not make you comfortable. They make you harder to fool. And that matters because culturally responsive leadership is not built from reaction alone. It is built from preparation. When the biased description appears, when the narrow curriculum lands on your desk, and when the display list skips the community you claim to serve, when somebody in a meeting says, "We have always done it this way," roots are what keep you from mistaking familiarity for fairness. Deborah, how am I doing on time? Ooh, okay. So we're going to go through these slides really quickly. So this is what she looks like with wings. All right. Our choices shape the record. Black art as evidence. She collected with intentionality as evidence. And you heard some of this from her lovely granddaughter about the significance of her collecting and the collections around the country. Another very important thing that we take from Dame Vivian is that every collection is an argument. Every description is a decision, and every silence is a choice. Now we talk about wings again, and wings are not abstractions, they are the visible shape of our ethics. The cost. All right, so this is really related to her being the first in so many ways, and the paths that she paved for the librarians, particularly the Black women librarians that came after her. Being the first also requires that we face friction. And if we avoid the friction, then we support the system. Okay, what we select today becomes what can be known later, and that was the power of her collection and her work. All right, so Dame Hewitt's life asks more of us. It asks us whether we are willing to absorb some discomfort in order to widen what can be seen. The compass is really equity, and equity is how we make our decisions. It is the lens through which we do our work. I mentioned that catalogs are not neutral, metadata is not neutral. This becomes particularly important with the art collection, right? How are we being culturally responsible when we house these works of art so they are discoverable and that they are also respectful to the artists and the cultures from which they were collected? So I'm just going to ask you this series of questions as we start to close. But who benefits from the systems as they stand? Who's missing? Who gets named, indexed, and found? So if we don't ask these questions intentionally, then the institution will answer them by default. And it means that some things won't be found, and some things will continue to be suppressed and even erased. So the horizon is really where Dame Vivian shines, and the horizon is the legacy of her work. So when we talk about the horizon, belonging is the goal. More of the wonderful pictures I was able to find of her. All right, a real tribute to Dame Vivian does not let us admire from a distance. It recruits us into responsibility. Okay, so as part of her legacy, we have the Hewitt Initiative here at the library, and so proud to even be a small part of that initiative, which started in 2024. All right, and so with this work, Dame Vivian created a living path, and this is one of the most important parts of honoring her. If we honor her only as a remarkable exception, we shrink her. If we honor her as part of a lineage and as a force that still shapes professional possibility, we learn much more from her. We start to see that Black librarianship has never been marginal to the life of libraries. It has often been among the clearest places where care, critique, public memory, and cultural imagination come together. So what does this all mean to us as I go through a couple more slides? Okay. So this work is for all of us to carry on and extend her legacy. We saw this a little earlier. Every collection is an argument. Every description is a decision. Every silence is a choice. So I want to end by asking you to think about this question. If Dame Vivian Davidson Hewitt walked through your library or your institution, your archive, your library, your classroom, your museum, your office, or your professional association, what would she see immediately? And what wouldn't she see? And I'm happy to throw my own organization under the bus for this. I think she and Mrs. Baker would have some words for folks. Okay? Even with an endowed chair named after Mrs. Baker, even with an initiative and a lecture series named after Dame Vivian Hewitt, there is still work to do. Okay. Okay, so I love this picture because she's actually at a table. Vivian Davidson Hewitt did not only break barriers, she left a record that scholars can study. She left a name that now opens doors for librarians of color. This is not quiet work. This is world-shaping work. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Are you doing your work on purpose and with purpose? Because you are already shaping what will be remembered. You are already shaping what will be found. You are already shaping what future users, students, and communities will think counts. The only question is whether you are doing this work with intention. So thank you so much for letting me honor Dame Vivian. It is a pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Dr. Cooke for her amazing words. Thank you. My name is Amy Anderson. I'm the CEO of the Allegheny County Library Association. Easy word to say. And I am proud to introduce the next portion of our evening, and this is our question and answer session. And first, we are going to have a session led for us by, as Mary Kay mentioned earlier, from Valerie Perez, who is a Pitt MLIS student and CLP Knoxville staff member. And we also have Dawn Martin, who is the CLP intern and Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh display winner. So they have some questions for Dr. Cooke, and I will let them to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Cooke, what a lovely presentation, so powerful. My first question to you is, why was it important for you to be an advocate for diversity in libraries?
So I'll give you a very short version of a long story. So in my professional life as a librarian, my service work was always with ALA's Spectrum Fellowship Program or Spectrum Scholarship Program. And that program is well over 20 years old, has put through maybe about 2,500 aspiring librarians of color through graduate programs. And so when I started my doctoral work, I was fortunate to be a Spectrum Doctoral Fellowship recipient. And when I started my first faculty position, I was in a very white place, in a predominantly white institution, and I had students challenge me. How dare this black woman think she can grade us? And how dare this black woman think that she knows something? Wow. So it was kind of at that moment where I said, well, if they can't deal with me, then they're not going to be able to deal with the diverse populations that I know libraries serve. And so from that point, I was privileged enough to be able to create a class, Information Services to Diverse Populations, which subsequently became a textbook. And I just felt like we have to do better. We have to do better than sending people out who say, I don't want to work with that population. Right. I don't want to work with those people. Because everyone is not going to be able to go back and work in their elementary school library, or, be in a place where there are no challenges. Like, every library has patrons who experience homelessness. Every library has veterans. Every library has all of these diverse populations, and we need to be willing and able to serve those populations. So that's really where that advocacy comes from.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Hi, Dr. Cooke. It's an honor to be here with you. So in neighborhoods like the one I serve, which is predominantly Black, also has a large unhoused population, the library functions as more than an information center. It's a place of care, of crisis response, and informal social work. How should librarianship evolve to better acknowledge and support that reality?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that we have started that evolution. With that said, I think the evolution could be a little bit more speedy. So for example, we have at the University of South Carolina, I know other places, other programs talk about trauma-informed librarianship, whole person librarianship. And we are, infusing some of those social work skills into the library curriculum. So I feel like we're dancing as fast as we can. Not to say that we're doing the best with that. We still have a lot of people who say, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up to do programs or some of the things that they think are traditional library duties. So, we are actively trying to partner with our College of Social Work. We just had a lecture on bibliotherapy, which is the therapeutic use of literature. We have a libraries and social work certificate that we're trying to get off the ground. So we're doing what we can. I would love to see a dual degree. That's probably politically a ways off. You know, and we have libraries that have full-time social workers, but every library doesn't have that luxury. So, you know, I was saying to a really wonderful group of library workers and library staff today, you know, that we all have to be engaged. We all have to be willing and able to deal with, especially what public libraries bring. And we're trying to enhance education so people are comfortable, but also don't think that they have to be social workers when that's not the degree they signed up for. So, in short, we can do better, but we are certainly trying.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Cooke, how or what tools have you used to navigate injustices in the workplace?
I'm going to keep this PG. That's another session. You know, I am very proud to say that librarianship is my first and only career. Went to library school right out of undergrad, and have been doing this work ever since. I talked about Dame Vivian being the first. I have been the first. I have been the one and only person of color, not just Black, just, you know, in an organization. And it's hard. And at my current institution, I have been charged with incivility, insubordination, all of the things. And it's just, you know, it's about my work, right? And I had a conversation with someone earlier about how much fight do you have in you? And I think it's important that we have some fight, right? But in hindsight, I do think that too much fight can damage you physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I think that we need to be wary of that. As I said to you earlier, it's like you mentioned, you gave the metaphor of kind of opening the window,
Right.
So people can come through. And I said to you, you need to pass that window on to someone else, right? Because we can't be the only ones holding things up and open without assistance, without bringing others along with us. So, you know, with that said, I think that burnout is inevitable, but I do think the moral of that story is how we get up and what we do next. And, you know, just as a side note, as I said to you earlier, I have a very strong mom. She had a very strong mom, and their motto was, "You're going to do better than I did." So my grandmother worked in a factory, only had an elementary school education. My mother integrated her high school, integrated her nursing school. You know, so who am I to complain when I know what they went through, when I know what Dame Vivian went through, when I know what Mrs. Baker went through? So sometimes it's just focusing on the work. Sometimes it's stepping back when you know you need to step back. Having collaborators, co-conspirators, finding folks on the outside to support the work. So there are lots of ways. So I would encourage folks, you know, even if you're in a particular place that you're not loving, you know, please don't give up on librarianship. Don't give up on our communities. There are so many ways, you know, for us to do this work.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So as we know, all roads always lead to Beyonce. So naturally, I have a question about her. All right. So my question is, Beyonce has shown that controlling your narrative can be a form of protection, especially for Black artists. Libraries, though, are built on making information accessible. How do we reconcile access with the right to withhold, especially for communities whose stories have historically been taken rather than shared?
Yeah, you know, I do a lot of work and I teach classes in social justice storytelling. And one of the conversations that we have is, whose story is it to tell? And we talk about appropriation and we talk about, you know, really just folks taking advantage. And I challenged a white colleague in journalism at South Carolina, and I can't remember exactly where she was, but it was a very rural community, very culturally rich community, a community to which she did not belong. And I said, how do you reconcile going in and telling their stories without their input? And she rationalized it in a way that someone with privilege and power does. And she said, well, who else is going to tell the story? And I said, them, right? So I was the co-editor of a journal called Libraries, History, Culture, and Society. So it's a library-focused journal on library history. And my former co-editor and I, we instituted a positionality statement for contributing authors and reviewers. And we said that if you are going to write about a community that you do not belong to, you must have a co-author that belongs to that community. When I tell you that we damn near got hate mail from these authors, these white academics who have for decades been writing about Black librarians, librarians of color, that are just subjects to them on paper. Because how dare you tell me that I can't write about these people? And so my response to them is that there are more than enough librarians of color who can tell their own stories now. And like I said, you can continue to write about Black librarians, but you will have a Black librarian as a co-author. So I think there are lots of ways that we can control the narrative or maybe reclaim the narrative, but I think it takes a lot of boundary pushing. It requires people to speak up, and it requires us to be firm in our stance. Because it's not easy, because, for a lot of people, this is new territory, and a lot of people feel privileged to be able to tell the narratives and recount the narratives of other people that they should not be. So that is a very explicit challenge to power. And I think we have to be ready to kind of take those hits when we say, no, you're not going to do that. No, you're not going to access that collection. There's a collection at one of the Smithsonian museums, and I remember talking to one of the archivists, and she said, there are things that we collect because we need that information, but there are things that are not going to be accessible because they are sacred rituals. And that is not information that was designed for the public. And so, it's a boundary for us, but it's also, a new norm that the audiences are going to have to just get on board with.
Yeah. Thank you for your courage.
And thank you for your time, too.
Of course.
Thank you all very much. We would now like to take questions from the audience. I believe, is there a microphone to pass around? Yes. I thought there was going to be one.
One of the things that, well, you said a lot of things that resonated with me in that presentation, but you talked about avoiding friction and supporting the system, and that really resonated because it just became real political to me. I'm thinking about our national experience, the war that we're battling, and people are not saying anything, and it seems that we're supporting what's being done, but we're complaining about gas and food, and it's just avoiding the system.
Mm-hmm.
How do we stop avoiding the system? How do we get our Congress to stop avoiding the system? How do we get people who's supporting somebody who's deranged? How do we get them to stop supporting that?
If I could stop that, I could retire. But in seriousness, I think that unfortunately we have a lot of people who have no moral courage. I don't know that they have any courage, much less moral courage. And we're dealing with folks who are clinging to power, and there's always money. There's always money. My mother tells me every day, follow the money, because she watches C-SPAN. Kills me, but it's informative. And I think, I hope that it's not cliche to say that we have to exercise our power and vote. And I hope that so many people will take it more seriously in November with these midterms. But I think that's what it is. Because you always have like these insiders who say, that's not really how they feel. And, I believe that to an extent. But if you don't agree with what you're supporting, you're complicit, right? And so I think the complicity is really just a lack of moral courage and clinging to whatever power. And I actually think it's probably more money than power, but and I think that's what it is, which is really, really unfortunate because we are the laughing stock of this entire globe.
My question is, how do you get a librarian to be responsive to the community in which she works in? And how are, let's say, the training for librarians, is it different, say, when you came along as opposed to today? Because many librarians, to me, still operate on, let's say, a 1900, 20th century model, and it doesn't quite fit today. So how do you deal with that? Because there are issues within the community that I go to with the librarian, and I'm not sure she's responsive to the community. So how do you deal with that?
So I have two thoughts on that. One, they haven't taken my class. And I think this is where LIS Education is really, really important and not given enough attention or funding. I had an amazing conversation with library staff today, and we talked a lot about that. I'm not going to tell you when I got my degree, but it does not look like what I teach now. And a lot of what I teach now is I am teaching what I didn't have. And I think we also talk about this idea of the virtuous circle. And we have to have library faculty and administration that look like the people that we want to serve. So if we have a program with all white faculty, there are going to be people of color that say, I can't be a librarian. That's not for us, because they can't see themselves in that, right? And if I don't have people of color getting their MLIS degree, then I'm definitely not going to have them getting their PhD. And when I retire, I'm gone, right? So I need someone to be ready to step in and continue this work.
Hold that window.
Hold the window open, absolutely. So, it's this circle, right? It's this kind of, and then it becomes like a vicious cycle. If we don't have representation in one area, then we can't have it in another area. And I think that that's a big part of what you may be experiencing. LIS Education is, we're behind the 8 ball. There are a lot of us doing this work, but we don't have a critical mass. And I think, we have to try our level best to embed that type of responsiveness. I was telling the staff today, and I may have mentioned it, I have students that say, I don't want to work in that kind of library. And what do you mean by that? They don't want to work with Black and brown people because they believe the stereotypes. They believe the microaggressions. It's very entrenched. And I also believe that we don't do a good enough job of letting people know, letting the communities know what we actually do. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I think if we had more allies and more co-conspirators on our library faculties teaching the aspiring librarians and information professionals, there would be more responsiveness. One thing that came up today when I was talking to the staff was, oh, you're so candid, you're so candid. I don't know how else to be. But I think there is still a level of, oh, I can't say that. I'll say it, tell me. right? And I think we need more of that, because when you get into the field, when you get into your libraries and your communities, if you have not had that conversation, you may not know how to be responsive, on top of you may not want to be, but you may not know how to do that. I have many, many conversations with my students about this is how we have hard conversations. This is how we interrupt a microaggression. I give them a script. I don't want to hear about I froze up. I didn't know what to say. If you take my class, you're going to know what to say. And I think we have to have more classes that have these hard conversations and make people uncomfortable. So we're working on it.
I have a follow-up question on that, actually, because, okay, for those of us who are in librarianship and who, you know, are quite a ways out of school, and you said, like, take your class. I would love to take your class. It sounds amazing. And some of us, you know, do want to care for people and to practice that person first and trauma-informed librarianship and respond to the needs of the community, even folks that aren't necessarily seen or talked about at board meetings or so on. And but I will say it was not what originally attracted me to librarianship. I was a kid who liked to read, you know, and I'm sure that there are a lot of folks that, you know, fall into the profession that way or another. Like, I've got, like, you know, an English background. I love literature. I like kids books. But, you know, you have the realities of the profession where it is, you know, speaking with people and helping people all day long. But I can't go back for another MLIS. And I know that there's plenty of resources, but since you are so candid and so knowledgeable, what would you say to those of us who are in the field and who want to and who are scrabbling those skills together, but it might not have been something that comes naturally to us? What would you say, since I cannot take your class, I am here at your lecture? You know, what is our next step? Because I hope I'm not the only one who is asking that.
You're in luck, you can take my class. And I say that flippantly, but you can actually take my class. So we have, again, with the privilege of rank and tenure, my History of Black Librarianship course is open to the public. We are offering more courses, usually during the summer. They're very abbreviated, but we started opening them to the public for professional development opportunities. And I know that other programs have opportunities in the same way. I'm looking at a dear friend here who knows that I'm at every conference, giving a talk or a lecture or something. So, you know, those of us who are doing this work and have been doing this work for a long time, we're out there as much as we can. Like, you can invite people. Tell Andrew to invite more folks, right? And have more lectures and have more opportunities. So yeah, I mean, you know, again, I absolutely take your point about not getting another degree. But I think that there are so many resources and so many people that are willing to speak. You know, Zoom them in, you know, if they can't, you know, come in person. But just to be able to have that conversation and to hear other people's stories. And to be able to extend that empathy, you know, to hear what other librarians and library workers of color are going through, to hear what our communities of color are facing. So yeah, I'm happy to connect you. But yeah, I do think it is much easier now to get some of these resources post MLIS than it was when I started this work however many years ago. Yeah.
You may not be able to answer this, but because it's more of a local question, I primarily utilize a library that's in the predominantly Black neighborhood, and on occasion I have discovered that they do not have the book selections that I think that they should. So my question is, what is the process or procedure for assigning book selections to the various branches?
So I cannot answer that question for the Carnegie library system. I can tell you what I've heard from other systems, and mileage may vary in different places. So we have what are called book jobbers. One of the major ones just shut down, so people are scrambling. But a lot of libraries will have profiles. And for a library system that has many branches, you'll have multiple profiles for the types of books they think that branch or that library might want. And so I was talking to some collection development librarians in Ohio. And the collection development librarians, this is their job, right, to collect for the collection. And with a larger system, you may have centralized collecting that then goes out to the branches. And this librarian I spoke to said that evidently the book jobber had labeled a particular collection or set of criteria as, diversity collection, equity, accessibility, et cetera. And she said that she had multiple branch librarians say, can you take me off that list? I don't want those books here. So now I don't say that to indict anyone or to say that by any stretch that's what happens locally. I say that to say, I think to the previous questions, the call is often coming from inside the house. Mm-hmm. So when you experience that, then you need to call them out. And you need to say to the branch librarian, or come on over here to Maine and say, I don't see what I need. And how can I talk to the collection development staff to ensure that the collections in this branch reflect the community that it serves?
Thank you. And I've had that happen all too often, so I am going to do an outreach because there are collections that I think should have been in that particular library. And I can call other places, other libraries, they have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not there. Absolutely. And I said, that's unacceptable.
It is.
Hello. We touched on this earlier, but I wanted to ask this question also for the greater audience. We're facing AI and this constant need to push technology, and as our libraries become more community centers, I know that's something that people are looking at, but I have not seen data that helps our children read better through technology. I have two parts of this question. Have you seen any data that helps kids read better through technology, through AI? And also, how can we push our libraries? I do work here, just FYI everyone. But how can we push our libraries as a collective, within and without, to actually promote more reading programs and more programs that have to do with interaction versus technology?
So I think that there is currently a gap in that data, but I think more and more research is coming, right? I think that people are actively engaging in this work now. To the second part of your question, I think it's just what I said to the lady behind you. You have to speak up. Now, whether or not that changes anything, I still think you should speak up, right? But I also, this is something I'll share with you, something my mother always told me. She said, you cannot complain without a solution. So if you're going to complain or provide feedback that you don't feel like AI is enhancing literacy, what is your proposed solution? And as I mentioned to the group earlier today, there's always going to be the next new bright, shiny technology thing, right? There's a lot of literature about, screen time and tablets and television time and how that impacts, children's comprehension, their literacy, et cetera. Point to that literature until the AI, more focused AI literature comes out. It requires a little bit more extrapolation, but it is a new technology that actually keeps us from reading a physical book, right? So using the literature and the data that we already have, and then asking the question and proposing a solution is probably, in my opinion, the best way to go.
First of all, thank you for all of your insights this evening. I don't know if this is actually picking up my voice. Okay. I'm non-binary. I have worked at 6 libraries, public, school, and academic so far in my life. At every single one of them, I have been the first non-binary staff member. And being the first is exhausting.
It sure is.
What are some things that you do to protect yourself from that exhaustion and isolation and care for yourself?
And, keep in mind that my response has come with age and experience, because I was the staff member that wound up in the hospital. I was the staff member that, had all kinds of stomach issues because I internalized that stress. I was that staff member who left places that were very clear that they were not going to protect me. So I've done all of that. So I truly understand that burden of being the first and the consequences that come with that. But to the care part of your question, you heard in the bio, I am very serious about taking weekends off. Now, it took me over 20 years to get there, right? So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying, that it just happens and that you can just do that. That just happens to be where I'm at now. And it's a privilege to be able to do that. I left an institution to come to South Carolina, and people said, oh, how can you go to South Carolina? It's so racist. And I was like, more racist than who? Right? Like every state I've lived in is racist. Every state is racist, right? But when I went for the housing visit at South Carolina, I saw other Black people. And I saw other brown people. I saw people that looked like me. The institution that I was at previously, I had to make an effort to find someone who looked like me. And that is, as I'm sure you can imagine, that is a particular burden. So is South Carolina perfect? Not by any stretch. But the quality of life is better. So, don't say Dr. Cooke told me to quit my job, because I didn't. But I'm saying sometimes we have to make the really hard decisions and take the really hard risks to make sure that we have that quality of life, right? Because no library job is worth our health, is worth our self-worth, because it is incredibly hard to be the first and the only. So take that as you will, but I will say that, we talked about vocational awe earlier today, and that idea that librarianship is all sunshine and rainbows and, we should give our lives for this. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And if you are in an environment that is requiring that of you, then that's not where you need to be. So I'm just telling you what works for me. But I will say, again, this has come over time, because I have been in that position where I let it consume me to my own detriment. And I just, as a last note, when a previous institution put me in the hospital, they kept moving. No one asked about me, no one checked on me, no one asked when I was coming back, right? And, you hear, about jobs if you should perish. Your job, the advertisement for your job will be out the next day, 100%, right? So we cannot continue to prioritize organizations that don't even make us a consideration.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for your questions. And now I would like to invite Dr. Deborah Rogers to.
And Deborah's going to let us end on a happy note, because that was a real downer.
If I have not had the opportunity to meet you, my name is Deborah Rogers, and I serve as the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility here at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. Thank you. Would you please join me once again in expressing our appreciation to Dr. Nicole Cooke and our delightful panelists, Valerie Perez and Don Martin. I do also want to reiterate my thanks to our partners, Allegheny County Library Association and Amy Anderson and the University of Pittsburgh School of Computing and Information and Dr. Mary Kay Biagini. We would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the Hewitt family, especially our good friend Vivian, the friends of the library groups that are here with us present this evening, our friends from the United Black Book Clubs of Pittsburgh and members of the Aurora Reading Club of Pittsburgh as well, of whom Dame Hewitt was a member. Thank you so much for joining us today. As was mentioned, since it is National Library Workers Day, would you also join me in thanking all of the library workers who helped to make this event a possibility? Now, I promise that Dr. Cooke and I discussed a lot of things, but we did not discuss this. But this year's theme of National Library Week is Find Your Joy. And I do hope that whether it was in the person sitting next to you, the memory and the inspiration of Dame Hewitt, the future of libraries mirrored in the discussion this evening and our audience questions, that you found something that sparked joy for you this evening. And we trust that you also heard something that will inspire you to take action, to grow as a reader and as a leader. Now, you may not be sure what your next step is, and we are here to help. We hope that your next step will be that each of you will join us for a reception upstairs, where, in addition to joy, there will be delicious food catered by Manna Meals, the opportunities to explore a zine that Dr. Cooke created, in addition to her amazing lecture this evening, and you can take a copy of that home with you. And on the first floor, we do also have an exhibit featuring archival pictures of Dame Hewitt, and we encourage you to visit the exhibit this evening or your next visit to CLP Maine. When you exit the auditorium, please do exit to your right and follow the hallway and guidance of some CLP staff who will show you the way to the reception on the second floor. Thank you again for joining us, and good evening to each of you.